And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we begin the week the best way that we know how, and that is by talking IU hoops and Big Ten basketball. I'm your host, Jared Morris. We'll be here with Mike DeCourcy in just a moment. Well, as you can see, Mike is here, but we'll start talking here in just a moment. I do have a few quick housekeeping notes right off the top. We will talk to you guys again for Assembly Call Radio on Thursday night. And then, as we've been telling you about, we are going to be in town this weekend. So Ryan gets in Thursday night. The rest of us get in on Friday. We will be there for the IU-Purdue game. And then about an hour after that game ends over at Switchyard Brewery, we are going to do a live post-game show. Hopefully breaking down a very important IU victory, but we'll be there. Galen will be there. I think the Hoosier Hysterics guys are going to be there. Hopefully Alex from Inside the Hall is going to be able to make an appearance. So we're just going to try and bring a whole bunch of IU podcasters there to talk about this game. For those of you who are not going to be in Bloomington and want to listen to the normal post-game show, obviously we won't be doing it, but Chat Mob Chad Schwarzkopf and Noah from the Hoosier Sound will have you here as normal, and it'll be produced by Will DeWitt, a name that those of you who've listened to us for a while will know, one of our very first student interns. So they will have the post-game show immediately after, and then for those of you who are in town, we hope that you'll be able to come join us at Switchyard, because we would love to meet you and shake your hand, and thank you for being a member of the Assembly Call audience. Okay, and now I am pleased to welcome in from the Big Ten Network, from the Sporting News, and now as a bracketologist for Fox, one of the hardest working men in college hoops. He is the venerable Mike DeCourcy. Mike, Andy Reid has now won the Super Bowl, so clearly he's the most clutch coach of all time, and Kyle Shanahan stinks and can't win the big one, right? Isn't that how we do this?
Oh, they're already at that. They're pointing out the fourth quarter numbers for Kyle Shanahan's two Super Bowl. Now, one was as an offensive coordinator, one was as a head coach, but the fact that he scored 0 points in the fourth quarter of both those games and blew leads in both those games is not being forgotten. And I think it's fine to point out the problems that they had. It's what happened. And you can point out the issues with that, but you should dissect it all more than you should just condemn the man and say that he can't coach and that he's a choker. I mean, that's what we do all the time. And then those guys, like Andy Reid, and I pointed out on Twitter last night, I mean, this is the list of people who have been like thrown under the bus and told they can't coach. Lute Olson, this is the full list, by the way. Lute Olson, Dean Smith, Jim Calhoun, Bill Self, Jay Wright, Mike Krzyzewski. I mean, John Calipari, let's not forget him. Every single one of those guys at one point was declared to be a choker and unable to win the big one. And it just gets preposterous after a while. And so I wrote a column when the Chiefs made the Super Bowl, pointing out how ridiculous all that is. And it gets exhausting. It really does. And, they're doing it to Archie's brother, Sean, now. I mean, he's been in the Elite Eight, I think, 4 times. I think 3 times at Arizona and once at Xavier. And it's just like, how do you think you get there? I mean, do you think you just wake up, you roll out of bed in the morning and you're in the Elite Eight? I mean, it's not how life works.
My favorite parts about these chats are like scrolling through your Twitter and finding out what's really got you and then winding you up with the very first question of the segment. I think it works really well.
My least favorite part about it is the inability to get the lighting so that I look like I'm,
Yes, you are.
You're coming me crazy.
You are coming to us from the darkness, but you are here to provide light with your wisdom and with your analysis. As Brian just said in the chat, this is Mike's weekly Keep IU fans from jumping off the ledge segment. This keeps my sanity. So no pressure there after a 2-loss week for the Hoosiers. Obviously, look, losing 2 games on the road in the Big Ten, not a surprise, not even really anything to be ashamed of, given how teams have played at home. But for Indiana fans, very disappointed that the Hoosiers really didn't compete, in either one of these games, certainly until the end. How did you assess Indiana's performance this past week?
I mean, that was the disappointment, is that they weren't really good in any area in either of those 2 games. And it takes you back to why the Maryland game was so punitive, because you had the game in your hands and let it go and didn't execute. So if you had gotten that one, then you would be 16-5 right now, and you'd be feeling good because you had and you would have much rather gotten a road win somewhere along the way and all that. But I mean, you'd be feeling pretty good about where things are. You'd be 6-4 in the conference. You'd be like many others. I think it's 6 others you'd be in the loss column within a game of first place. There's 6 teams with either 3 or 4 losses in the league. You would be one of those, and frankly should have been easily. I mean, not easily because you're playing a terrific team, but if everything was in your hands, you had the ball up 7 with under 4 minutes. I mean, that's the kind of game that every good team, especially at home, every good team should bat like 999 in those circumstances. And they didn't do that. So then they go to Penn State and they just don't have anything. And then, the guards get completely wiped out. And then they go to Ohio State and the front court gets completely wiped out. And you don't have much to show for either game. You can't look at either performance and say, well, at least we did this. That's the disappointment from the week's 2 games.
As you look back on what Indiana just faced from Thursday, January 23rd through February 1st, so a span of 9 days, they faced teams currently ranked 9th, 10th, 16th, and 12th. That is 2 of them were at home, 2 of them were on the road. That's a difficult 4-game gauntlet with not much time between games. You lost a player in Race Thompson who only played in the first one. So you look at it from that sense, going 1-3 is not the worst thing in the world. It's disappointing given how it happened. But now, from that Saturday game against Ohio State through next Thursday, Indiana only plays twice. Both games at home, and their opportunities, to pick up wins, hopefully over, Purdue, who's ranked 28th in Ken Palm, Iowa, who's ranked 13th.
Right.
Before we get into those games, how big of a deal do you think that just that scheduling is? Like that Indiana had to play those tough an opponents in that condensed a period of time, and now they're actually going to have a little bit of rest. How much of a difference does that make now?
Yeah, I think the rest helps because they can use practice time. I mean, one of the problems that I see in this league right now, and it's easily compared to the ACC. You look down the road, a couple hours down the road from where I'm sitting, Louisville right now, came into late January not really knowing who their point guard is. They knew they wanted it to be David Johnson, the freshman, very talented, but he was hurt early, fell behind. They're trying to win games, trying to get a good seed and maybe win the ACC title, and struggling to get him caught up. But they're in the ACC, and so they can go out and they can play against teams like a very I'm going to go and look exactly at the schedule so I can put this in sequence. But they go and they play Georgia Tech at home and Clemson at home and at Boston College. Now, they won at Duke, so I'm not diminishing them as a team. They're terrific. But what I'm saying is that after Johnson played really well at Duke, and they needed him to win that game, there's no question. But then they were able to say, okay, let's get this worked out. So now we know he can play. Now we can know he can play in a spotlight. He can play against great team. But you still have to build the formula. You still have to build the comfort level. And so they go out against Georgia Tech and Clemson, and they weren't great against Georgia Tech. They only won by 4, but it was going to be really hard to lose that game. And then they beat the tar out of Clemson, and they were able to go on the road, and Boston College isn't any good. And now they got it pretty much figured out. They know how they want to play. And they go and they play against NC State, which is playing for a bid, but not really, sort of struggling. And Louisville's really good now, and they go out and lock that one down too. And if they were in the Big Ten, I mean, that just wouldn't happen. I'm not saying they couldn't find their way to being good. I mean, Illinois has. But it every day would be a struggle for survival, just to, and then maybe at the end of that, you're saying, okay, we did all these things right and we survived each of these days and now we're good. And now we got a record that allows us to breathe a little bit. If we drop one, it's not going to kill us. It's not like if we drop one, we're under 500. You drop one now, you're 7-3 or 8-3 or whatever. So there's a difference there. And that's what, the Indiana, as soon as we got past, as you look as a group of basketball people, as you looked at the schedule, and as soon as the Hoosiers got back past the Northwestern game, I looked at the schedule, and I think at that point there were 15 games left, and 14 of them were against teams that were competing for tournament bids, legitimately competing. I mean, so like if you, I had Minnesota in my bracket once so far. I have not had Purdue in a while, if at all. But Lenardi has had Purdue in his bracket, so they're competing. And the other 10 teams have been in my bracket pretty much without interruption. I mean, they might be toward the back, but I have never had one of the 10, the other 10 aside from Wisconsin, Purdue. I have never had one of them in a first four game. The only first four Big Ten game I've had in any of my brackets was when Minnesota got up to 3 games over 500. I put them in on the I think it was on the 11 line in a first four game. And that's it. Everybody else, you're not solidly in because you go out and lose 4 in a row or whatever, and you could fall out. But none of those teams has been on the edge. So that's what you're dealing with as an Indiana team. You are dealing with the deepest conference, probably the deepest, let's put it this way, the deepest mega conference. I mean, I can say that in 1991, when I covered Pitt in the Big East, there were 9 teams in that league, and 8 of them were alive into the final weekend. And 7 of them made it. That's a 77.8%, I think, success rate. To beat that, I think the Big Ten has to get 12 out of 14.
Yeah.
But the difference is that you're playing 20 games in the mega conference, okay? In that Big East, there were 9 teams, so you played 16 games. That gave you 10, 12 games to do whatever you wanted with. And and I think they might have been in ACC Big Ten Challenge then. I think they had it going. So, okay, you had one really tough game for sure. But then there was room to breathe. You got to play 20 games, and it pretty much on average, 17 of them are against tournament contenders. I mean, that is a brutal deal. It's hard to get better in that circumstance. And that's why this time for Indiana is time when they can get better. They aren't going to get better if they don't use those 2 opportunities to win, because then confidence will be a problem and unrest. I'm talking about exterior unrest, which creates a difficult atmosphere and makes it harder to get better. But if you take advantage of the time off in terms of practice improvement, and then you apply that in those 2 games to getting wins that you need, then that maybe serves as that cushiony schedule that some of the other conferences have that the Big Ten and Big East do not this season.
You talk about improving and maybe things Indiana can do differently. It's inevitable that Indiana's going to play 2 bigs a decent majority of the time because of how important Trace is and just because of how the roster is constructed. But do you think it is time to try playing smaller more, to try, only having one of those guys out there, maybe playing with, Justin Smith or Jerome Hunter as a 4, playing 3 guards? Like, is it time to try that a little bit more to try and open things up offensively?
I'm not sure that I wouldn't go bigger, because you can trust your bigs more than you can trust your guards. Your guards have been all over the map. And you get Armand Franklin, you get a great game. He goes on the road and he doesn't do much for. I know he wasn't good on Saturday. I don't think he was good in the Penn State game either, because
none of the guards were good in the Penn State game.
Yeah,
they were all not good.
So I'm not sure that I wouldn't trust that. At least at that point, you're getting your better players on the floor, the guys who've performed. I mean, Justin has been at least consistent. I don't think he's been what he's capable of being, but I think he's been good. Trace has been terrific, especially when you grade on the freshman curve. Joey has been who he is, which is a guy who finishes around the rim and rebounds fairly effectively, sometimes struggles a little bit to defend. And then you throw in Jerome, who is not necessarily a prototypical front court player, but neither is Justin, but a guy who can function as either a 2 or a 4, depending on how big you want to be. So I feel better about those guys. So I understand what you're trying to say, but if you go smaller, you're putting more of the guys on the floor who've been vexing to you. And I'm not saying that if you did that, that might not empower them, but can you count on them? And that's, it's interesting. Rob Finney is a guy whose trajectory I really liked as a freshman, and who has had good moments this year, but some rough moments too. And he's been injured some and is back on the floor. And at times you think, is he okay? And then he gives you a game like he did against, I believe it was the game before Maryland, the
Michigan State.
Yeah, he was really solid, really good in that game. And you think, okay, he must be, he's good enough. He's okay enough. And then you see him play like he did on Saturday, and you hear Robbie Hummel saying, I don't know if he's healthy. I just doesn't seem the same. And so I don't know. But the other guys, I think Armand's a freshman, and that, he's a very talented kid, but he's not one of those guys who can talent his way through things like a John Wall could. If John Wall had a problem when he was a freshman, at some point he could just say, well, yeah, I don't really know what I should do here, but I know what I can do.
I'd like to deal with those problems.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, it's a different thing. And so he's been up and down like a lot of freshmen are. And then you have the veteran guys who give you good moments and then do things that you keep saying, you're a senior now. How much longer do you have to play before you get it? And that's kind of where IU has been for most of this year.
So let's look ahead to what Indiana has coming. As we said, they face Purdue on Saturday. Again, that Iowa game isn't all the way until next Thursday, so we'll have another chance to talk before we have to talk about the Hawkeyes. But this Purdue game is important to Indiana for a number of reasons. We had Mark Titus on our post-game show after the Ohio State game, and he referred to Purdue as the best team that never actually wins, just in reference to their KenPom ranking. Their computer rankings just never seem to drop, no matter how many losses they take. They're 12-10 right now. They came perilously close to losing that Northwestern game, and then just had an incredible set on the final play. And I think they made an 11-0 run at the end to pull that game out. Purdue's going to come in. They're going to play hard. They're going to make that a tough game, even though it's in Bloomington. How do you look at that matchup? Where do you kind of see some places that Indiana can take advantage?
Well, I think the first thing where Indiana would need to take advantage of is in Assembly Hall, if you understand what I mean. I mean, this is a team that has won that the Saturday game that Northwestern had a 8-point lead with 3 and change left. And I believe that lead stayed in force into the final two, not into the final 2 minutes, but into when 2 and change, it was 2 something. They still had that because they had an 8-point lead. They had 2 bad trips, but Purdue didn't score on either of the in answer to either of those 2 bad trips. So then Northwestern comes down, if I remember correctly, and has a 3rd bad trip, trying to kill clock, but not able to generate much. And then Purdue comes down and hits a 3. And then Northwestern comes down and has another bad trip, and then another 3 and on and on. And so really, Northwestern had to really hand them the opportunity. Now, they had to take the opportunity. They couldn't drop it. But Northwestern had to open the door wide for Purdue to get through there. So the first thing that you have to say is this is a team that has won 1 high major road game at Northwestern, the worst team in the league, and had to have the door open for them to get that. So if you don't come with a full force effort in that game at the very start, then what are we doing here? I mean, if you don't chase them out of the gym, so to speak, say, no, this is not a place where you're going to want to play. This is not going to be any fun for you. Not, like all the other road games you've lost, this isn't going to be any fun. That's the first thing you have to do. You have to make them remind them that they're not in Mackey. Eventually, Mackey's coming up, and you're going to have to deal with that. But
we'll think about that later.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But they're going to do that.
Yeah,
I guarantee that, because that's what they do. They have been great in every home game. They beat Michigan State by 30. I mean, the only home game that they haven't won in conference was against Illinois, which right now has performed the best of any team in the league. So that's the first thing, is that you have to, as a team, make it difficult to play. And then I think the second thing you have to do is you have to do a very good job defensively on Sasha Stefanovic, because when he makes shots, which is almost exclusively in Mackey, they're very good. They're very hard. They play well defensively, even when they are on the road and not winning. It's mostly because they can't score. So you have to slow him down. His splits going into Saturday, so I haven't updated, and he only went, I think, 2 of 8, so it didn't change much. Changed a little, but his splits were, he was shooting close to 48% from 3 at home, and it was, before going into that game, is 20.5% away from Mackey, 20.5%. So, and then he made, and he wasn't great. He was 2 for 8. So he made the big one, and they ran a set that was perfect and beautiful. And he made the biggest shot of the game to win it. And so if you allow, like I said, if you open that door, they're a mentally tough team. In some spots, they're going to fight. If they see daylight, they're going to fight for it. But a lot of the time on the road, they haven't. And so they haven't been competitive. And, I think the other thing you have to do is you have to defend the interior well. I mean, Travion Williams is capable of hitting 38 and 20 in a game against Michigan. And so, but you can also knock him off this game. I mean, Northwestern did that. He was not good in that game. There was a point in the game when he got benched where they just said, take a seat. And it was not because he wasn't converting when he had opportunities. It was because he wasn't battling all the time. He's turning the ball over. He wasn't guarding well. He wound up 6 and 9 for 13 points. Doesn't look like a bad day, but there was a stretch in there where they just said, we could do this without you. And so, you've got to do a really good job on him. He's got unbelievable hands. He's a great finisher. He can command space, and he passes really well. So you have to execute against him. You have to if you're going to double him, you can't just mosey around out there. You've got to make sure the doubles are hard so that he can't see out. Because if you don't, then he finds the pass and puts his guys in good spots. He's really good at it. So that's another thing. Those are probably the 2 biggest elements. And then whoever your guy is, and right now I'm not sure who that is for the Hoosiers, but that person, whoever they put Nogel on, has got to realize that it's going to be a tough day for you to do anything. I mean, let's say they decide that they're worried about Devontae having one of those Florida State days, and so that's where Nogel goes. Well, then you can't keep pursuing that Florida State day. I mean, at that point, you got to become a distributor and a screener and a helper, and because you're not going by him. I mean, there are guys that can go by him, but they don't play for Indiana. I mean, that's just the reality of your lineup. They don't. I mean, there are guys out there who could do it, but right now in your current iteration, that's not the guys you got. You've got good players, but you don't have that guy. So you have to find ways to deal with the ability that he presents to shut down a great scorer. And then you have to take advantage of the fact he's not a great shooter, and try to put him on an island and use his defender to mess up other guys, while at the same time not losing track of him so that he can hurt you on the offensive boards and things like that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's kind of zoom out. Let's talk about the conference. How are you power ranking the conference after another up and down week?
It's a hard one, because the team that I mentioned, Illinois, I think they're probably one right now because of all the road wins they have. I think, even yesterday in defeat, they were really good. That Illinois-Iowa game was one of, if not the best Big Ten games this year. And there have been a lot of good ones, but that was just stunning some of the plays that were made, just amazing. The right-handed scoop shot, the off-handed scoop shot by Georgi Bashanishvili on his right hand around the defender. We were debating at BTN whether it looked more like Connie Hawkins or Dr. J.
Oh boy!
when that's your frame of reference, yeah. You've had a pretty good play.
Yeah.
So Andres Feliz pulling a rebound away from I think it was Garza and Kriener, two of Iowa's big guys. I can't remember which. I know Garza was involved. I think the other one was Kriener. Just ripped it right out of their hands. So they did, even in defeat, they did great things. They just couldn't hold Garza off, and didn't make enough plays down the stretch. But they've been the one. I would say Michigan State still too. Michigan State more than anybody. That big dissertation I gave about Louisville, the difference between Louisville and say Indiana, really applies more to Michigan State because they've got all their components. They just need still to put them together, and they're having trouble doing that because every game's a fight. I mean, they go on the road to Wisconsin. You go on the road to a 12-9 team in the ACC, and you're trying to stay awake half the time. It's like a great team. Like I said, with Louisville at NC State, I mean, they played 25 minutes and then they could just relax the rest of the way. You can't do that now.
What does that feel like?
You go on the road to Wisconsin, they put you down 17 in the first half.
Yeah.
So, but that's what's affecting them because they have the ability to be great. I really believe that. I mean, they've got so many guys, and if they could just I think they could be outstanding, but they can't find it. And I don't know that they're going to get there. Maybe the Big Ten tournament gives them the opportunity because the games matter a little less, perhaps. You can look at it. You can say, let's just use this tournament to get better for the next one. I'm not saying the Big Ten tournament title isn't important or that it won't matter in seeding or whatever, but I think, that might be an opportunity for them on a neutral floor where they're not at a disadvantage crowd-wise and all that, maybe to get better for a couple of days. So we'll see. From there, Maryland, and Maryland's fans are giving me heck about having them as a 4 seed. That's a good sign when you're a 4 seed and you're complaining about it. But I still want to see more from them on the road than we've seen. They did get the Indiana win, and that's a good one for them, but that's one of their few. So that's another team that the advantage they have is that they've got the 1-5 going, and Michigan State has that to an extent, but then you have your 5 is 6'8", and sometimes that's a problem in this league. And in every other league, you don't have an Oturu, a Garza, a Travion, a Trace. I mean, Sticks. Every team you go to has one of those. In other leagues, they don't. So on Saturday, I think size bothered Xavier Tillman, whereas in Maryland, they've got the 1-5 going. They've got the point guard in Anthony Cowan, and they've got the post in Jalen Smith. And so that's really what works for them. But I still think in order to be the team that the guy who was yelling at me on Twitter wants to believe that Maryland is, they've got to get more consistent play out of their wings. They have to know what they're going to get out of Ayala. They have to know what they're going to get out of Wiggins. They have to know what they're going to get out of Morcell. If they those guys go in and out, and it's not just about who scores. They go in, and when they don't score, sometimes they drift out. And so they've got to get those guys all completely on board with whatever their roles are going to be. And when that happens, they have a chance to be special. And then number 4 is Iowa, which is a team that has great role definition right now. They know exactly who they are. They know exactly what they need to do to be great. They just, they're not a great defensive team. And can they overcome that in a league like this, in the NCAA tournament? That's what we're going to have to find out. I have my doubts. Can they get better at that? I think that's, it's another thing. Everybody has a chance to get better. I know they can get better. Can they get better enough, I guess, is the better question.
As you look ahead for games that IU fans should be keeping an eye on, obviously the big one that jumps out is on Wednesday. Purdue and Iowa play, Indiana's next 2 opponents. I share some of the same reservations about Iowa that you do. When you look, they've now won, 6 out of 7, but 5 of those have been at home. The one road game they won was at Northwestern. They lost at Maryland. So, can they go on the road and get it done? Obviously, if they go to Purdue and win that game, you really have to start taking them a little bit more seriously.
Right.
But that game, what are you looking for in that game? And then what other games are really big this week?
Well, I think there were a lot of people in the Big Ten who were hoping that Northwestern would finish that job on Saturday night, because I think they thought that if they could get Purdue down to 500, that as great a coach as Matt is, maybe the guys would just give up just a little bit.
Painter can't win the big one, whatever.
Giving up is a factor in college basketball. I mean, you see it all the time. You're not going to see it in this league. It's not going to happen because two teams that aren't any good are young and believe and have coaches who kept their guys' heads in this. They might not win any more games, but they're, especially when they're at home and probably when they get to a neutral floor, they're going to be invested in trying to survive and trying to win, because they know that that next year is what they're playing for. And so they're okay with not, they don't look at their record and celebrate, but it's not about what their record is now. It's about a year from now, can we do what Illinois did? And can we do what Rutgers did? So from that standpoint, I think you have to look at it and say that Purdue missed that window of being one of those teams out there that could just say, I don't know if we're going to get there this year. They're still there. They're still in it. Now they come at home and they're playing a team that's a 4 seed, a 5 seed right now in my bracket. And so they can get right back in this. The only thing between Purdue and being in my bracket is being at least 3 games over 500. That would put them there. And I'm not saying I'm the gatekeeper or anything, but what I am saying is that I'm one of the few holdouts. I mean, there are others out there that are putting them in. So they know that they just need to stack wins, because their metrics are so good that if they do that, one, their metrics will only get better because most of the wins that you stack in this league are high quality, quad 1 or quad 2. And 2, they've already done enough that their metrics have built the base for them. They just have to build onto it. So I think that they're going to fight like heck to beat Iowa. I don't have any doubt about that. And Iowa, Michigan State, Iowa's going to know going in there that it's going to be one of the tougher road games they face, because Mackey's crowd is one of the best in the league, and the team plays completely differently there than they do when they leave.
And Fran's already fired up after the end of that Illinois game, so let's see how he responds to the Mackey crowd. Last question for you, Mike. As you look around the conference, obviously, there's a lot of players that are getting a lot of pub, guys like Luka Garza and Cassius Winston, of course, Jalen Smith, Ayo Dosunmu. Who's a player that's playing really well that you think is flying under the radar that people should be talking about more?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a great question. Who is playing great in the league that's flying under the radar?
And maybe it's one of those guys that just isn't even getting enough attention, but
while I think about the other, Ayo, I think, is playing certainly at an all Big Ten level, and given his position, maybe all America level. I mean, he's been phenomenal, and I don't know that people are paying attention to that. I think Jalen Smith. I mean, the Wooden list came out and Anthony Cowan was on it. I think Anthony's having a nice year.
Over Jalen Smith?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure that there was no Jalen. Yeah. I mean,
that's ridiculous.
That the best player on Maryland's team this year has been by at least.
It's not close.
Yeah. I mean, he's been phenomenal. And I think I think Anthony's been fine. He's been very good. He's not been overwhelming, but he's having a good year. His team's 17-4. He's putting up good numbers, good percentages, but he's not overwhelmed anybody. He doesn't have anything to apologize for, but Jalen Smith's been phenomenal.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's a guy that needs to get way more attention. Now, part of it is that I think Jalen's averaging, the last time I looked, he was averaging around 14.5 a game. So people don't always catch on when you do that. But you're talking about a guy who has a lot of balls fly over his head. I mean, those guys like to shoot that, and the offense is built for that. And they don't always throw it in the post. And they run, they'll run a lot of pick and pops for him, and he's very good at it, but they don't feed the post a lot. And so that's part of the reason why his scoring numbers are not elite.
His usage rate is only 23%. You look at, guys like Lamar Stevens and Weston and Garza, they're using 30% of possessions. Get him the ball, Maryland. I didn't realize it was that low. Yeah,
that's not what they do. I mean, like I said, when Jalen winds up with the ball in his hands, it's, I'd say probably, easily, I shouldn't put a percentage on it because it's just be a made up number, but a vast majority of the time, he's either pulling it off the offensive board or it's a pick and pop situation or pick and roll. But they don't feed the post that much. They play it other ways and they're successful 17-4. So I'm not going to argue with it, but because of that, he doesn't get as much attention as he deserves. And I keep going back to this. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show. I know I've mentioned it on the network, is my admiration for him, because how many guys have you seen, Jared? They complain and complain and complain because they have to be the center. I saw an army of bigs in the last 10 years go through the 6'11", 265, and they set up in the post and they guard the other team's big guy, and they're listed as forwards because they don't want to be called a center. And this guy's standing out there around 4'6'4" guys half the time, and the other half, and he's got nobody to take the physical heat off. I mean, he has ball, and he's great. One of my favorite players in the league this year, easily.
He takes his frustration out on opposing fans after big road victories.
I think he does. Yes, I think he does.
Well, Mike, we appreciate your insight as always. Hopefully one of these years, our annual trip up there coincides with one of your trips down to Assembly Hall, which would be a lot of fun.
Well, with the new job, it limits my weekday games now too, because I'm on the FS1 pregame shows and postgame shows from time to time, and so it's harder for me to get to a game now than it used to be in the past. But I'm really enjoying working with the Fox people. My old friend Jimmy Jackson, he's phenomenal. The anchors are all great. The producers.
My old nemesis. Did I tell you before the Ohio State game last year, we were there and he was getting out of his car and I saw him and I walked over to him and I didn't really have a plan. So I just said, I want you to know that I grew up hating you. And he's like, what? I was like, I was an IU fan. You always killed us. Like, I respect you, but I hated you. And it was like this, like, I think he thought I was going to like jump him or something, which is totally my fault for being really awkward. But then he was really nice and, shook our hand and everything. He seemed like a really nice guy.
He is a great guy. One of my favorite people. I just real blessed to get a chance to know him. He's awesome. And so getting to be reunited with him is terrific. And the Fox people that I work with have all been delightful. So, and then the BTN thing, I mean, they're the best. Yesterday was the 10th anniversary of me getting a phone call saying they wanted to put me on TV, and so that was a good day. So
wow, yes, it was.
It was pretty cool. And the reason I know that is because it was Super Bowl Sunday 10 years ago. They were the Colts and the Saints, I think, were playing, if I remember right.
Yeah,
pretty cool. They've been awesome.
They have been awesome. Well, Mike, thank you. Have a great week watching Big Ten hoops, and we'll look forward to talking with you next week.
Hard not to have a great week watching Big Ten hoops, Jared.
That is true. That is true.
See you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. All right, the great Mike DeCourcy here with us on Mondays, talking IU hoops, talking Big Ten hoops. We always really appreciate it. All right. Time to get off here, go get this podcast posted. We'll be back for Assembly Call Radio on Thursday, like I said. And again, if you're going to be in town on Saturday, hit us up. Send me, a note on Twitter. Send me an email. Let me know that you're going to be there. We'd love to be able to meet you either at Assembly Hall for the game or at Switchyard after that. Friday night, we'll be out too. So hopefully if you are in town, please let me know so that we can meet up and see you. Goodness gracious. Let's go win that game at home. It's a huge, huge game for Indiana. As bad as we all feel right now after collapsing against Maryland and losing 2 straight on the road, we're one good home victory away from getting back to 500 and being right back on the trajectory that we need to be at to hit our goal of making the NCAA tournament. So a really big game for Indiana to come home. This conference is so tough. This team is obviously up and down, has so many holes on its roster, things it doesn't do well, but they played pretty well at home, and so they got to come out, do it again, get another victory, and then we can hopefully start building some good momentum for down the stretch. All right, thanks to everybody who's here live. Thanks again to Mike DeCourcy, and we will talk to you guys Thursday night for Assembly Call Radio.